What's up everyone, Volty here. Today we're going to be talking about Tarkir Dragonstorm, the latest upcoming Magic set, and we'll be doing a set review for 7-Point Highlander. Now this is specifically going to be for the format of Australian 7-Point Highlander. Whether or not I say a card is good, or bait for example, does not imply it won't see play in Standard or be good in Commander. This is very specifically for that format. So we'll start off with the first category, the good. These are cards that I expect to see a fair amount of play. They interact favorably with the format, or they fill a niche, or can be added to an existing deck. So these are cards that I would expect to see some amount of play after release. To start things off, we have Ugin, Eye of the Storms. I actually have a whole video about this card. But in short, if you have the ability to accelerate this out on turn 4, or turn 3, or turn 5, it's probably going to win you the game. And if it doesn't, at the very least, it's going to give you quite a bit of value before it goes down. Next up, we have Clarion Conqueror. For 2 and a white, you get a 3/3 with flying, and it's essentially a Stony Silence stable to a couple of other effects. But activated abilities of artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers can't be activated. I think it's very important that it also turns off planeswalkers here, because cards that affect creatures and artifacts might be blanks in control decks. We're having a 3/3 with flying that can also deal with, say, a Teferi Time Raveler or a Renin 6 that's accruing a lot of value. This should be able to be... I think this will be a staple sideboard card of any kind of white mid-range deck if you're looking for that effect. Now, critically, the text on the card is symmetrical, so if you, for example, want a Stony Silence effect to turn off artifacts, and you want a body but you can't play Collector Roof, playing this card will turn off activated abilities of your own creatures. The most obvious example of this is going to be Mother of Runes, which would be a perfect card to pair with it to protect it if that didn't work. So that's something to keep in mind, but otherwise I do expect the card to see some amount of play. Next up, we have Auroral Procession. For green-blue, we have an instant, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Regrowth has seen reasonable play across 7-Point Highlander's history. This is harder to cast, but it's an instant, and it pitches to Force Will. I would expect it to see play somewhere, probably some of the green-blue Oath control decks, for example, or some of the blue combo decks that play some amount of green mana that would maybe want a regrowth as an extra effect. I don't expect it to be very, very good in spots where you want Eternal Witness, because for the most part that's in the Walks deck. But at the same time, this card is very neat, it's very powerful. Being an instant is incredibly important for a card like Regrowth, where what you want to pick up may change over time, especially if you're spending the 2 mana to pick up a card before you have the ability to play that card. So being an instant is going to be a huge draw here, but again, Regrowth existing in mono green, and therefore something like Jund or Gruul or Naya is very different to a Simic card. Next up is Craterhoof Behemoth. I don't really know how to evaluate this card. So for 5 green, 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 you get a 5/5 with haste. It's a beast, but that really shouldn't matter. And then when this creature enters, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures you control. I think that the fact that it counts itself and it has haste, meaning that if you get a Craterhoof trigger in play and you have like 3 other creatures, at least 2 of which can attack, it's adding up to quite a lot of damage. I think the most obvious use case for this will be Natural Order. However, I wouldn't be surprised if a green-blue opposition deck with Mana Dorks wants to play a Show and Tell, or is willing to use Gaia's Cradle to Green Suns for 8 to put this into play. I'm not 100% sure that this card is good. I don't think we've really seen this effect before. We've had Decimator of the Provinces, which was like an Eldrazi card that kind of did this. And then there was a white card that was also 8 mana that gave Vigilance or Flying, but not Trample. Trample is very important to this effect. When you're playing an overrun, the difference between Trample and not Trample is usually quite a lot, because for the most part, your creatures are going to get blocked in some capacity over the course of your attack. But I do think this card has legs, and I think it might see a little bit of play in our format. At the moment, Natural Order for Atraxa does look better, but this is a really cool new card out of Tarkir Dragonstorm, so it's exciting to see what people can do with this. Next up are the sleepers and maybes. These are potentially viable cards that might find a home, either now or in the future, but they're not necessarily obviously playable to me. This is going to have a lot of cards in it that may or may not be good. So if you're looking for inspiration, this section is going to be pretty meaningful for you. First up, we have Anafenza Unyielding Lineage. For 2 and a white, you get a 2/2 with Flash and First Strike, and whenever another non-token creature you control dies, it endures 2, so you can put 2 counters on it, or you can get a 2/2. I think the vast majority of the time you will make a 2/2. However, because it does have First Strike, making Anafenza bigger with, for example, the first trigger is probably going to be pretty reasonable. Fact that it has Flash, which means you can play it in response to a removal spell on your creature, make a 4/4 to crack in next turn, and suddenly they have to deal with this, but they, may or may not have to deal with other creatures first, like Mother of Runes or Giver of Runes. I think this card is interesting. One of the big issues is that a white creature without evasion or the initiative tag is pretty bad, so I wouldn't be surprised if a white mid-range deck isn't going to play this card, but a mono-white aggressive deck, I could certainly see it. Next up, we have Rally the Monastery. I'm really excited for this card in Standard. I have no idea if it's going to be good in this format. So for 4 mana at instant speed, you can make 2 1/1s with Prowess, you can pump 2 creatures for +2/+2, or you can tag a creature with power 4 or greater, and if you've cast another spell, it costs 2. Realistically, when you're putting this on the stack, you're either going to be casting it for 2, or you're going to be casting it for 4 and you have nothing else to do with your mana anyway. Getting 2 monks with Prowess is fine. I would say the fact that it's white and not blue or red is a meaningful downside for that effect. However, being able to play a combat trick that isn't embarrassing just to have in your main deck is reasonable, and the fail state of tagging a big creature is quite a lot. This card looks very medium, but all of the bits and pieces kind of add up to a really reasonable, flexible flex spell, modal spell. I think it might see a little bit of play. Maybe people will tinker with Jeskai rather than Izzet Initiative. But I'm not super keen on it. Next up is Static Snare. So 4 and a white for an enchantment. It has Flash. It costs 1 less for each attacking creature. It's basically an O-ring. It can only target artifacts or creatures. And notably, it can't target your own things to protect them, for example. But if you're just playing this as your Path to Exile number 6 in your aggressive deck, I think it's fine. It might see a little bit of play in some sideboards just as an extra bit of creature interaction to push through damage. Next up is Sun Pearl Kirin. For 1 and a white, you get a 2/1 with Flash, Flying. When this creature ETBs, return up to 1 of the target non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. Fills a token, draw a card. This is the newest iteration of White Mane Lion. The fact that it's a 2/1 with Flying is substantially better than a 2/2, and the fact that if your opponent is killing one of your tokens and you're not abusing the ETB effect to reset something, but you just want to play it as a threat, that you can play this, pick up a token and draw a card, is very meaningful upside. I think this card is going to see play wherever White Mane Lion could have seen play, but I do think it is substantially more powerful. Next up is Kishla Trawlers. For 2 and a blue, you get a 3/2. When this creature ETBs, you can exile a creature card from your graveyard. When you do, you can regrowth an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. We haven't had Archaeomancer effects at 3 for a while now, and I think the cost of exiling a creature from your graveyard is not negligible, but it is pretty close. I don't know how often people are going to play this card, but it is in a decent color, and it does have a very reasonable effect that's quite easy to turn on, so I wouldn't be surprised if it shows up. Next up is Kasi Revenant. So for 1 black, you get a 3/3 with flying, death touch, lifelink, and for 2 and a black, you can flash it back. You can exile it from a graveyard, put a flying counter, a death touch counter, and a lifelink counter on target creature, activate only as a sorcery. I think this might show up in sideboards for certain black mid-range decks. Being able to turn your Tasiga or your Gurmag Angler into a flying death touch lifelinker is a pretty big deal. Putting it on a Nethergoyf, for example, would be incredible. It's possible you would use it just to give flying to a Barragoyf as well, or being able to put it on a Sheoldred. It's just kind of a lot of stats for what is essentially a glorified Vampire Nighthawk, but you get an extra point of power and you get this other ability. I wouldn't be surprised if this card's good enough. Next up is Strategic Betrayal. So for 1 and a black, at sorcery speed, target opponent exiles a creature they control and their graveyard. This is a really weird effect. Most edicts will just make them sacrifice a creature, so the fact that this doesn't put something into the graveyard is meaningful, and it tags their graveyard, which is a pretty big deal when at the moment so many people are using their graveyards really aggressively. The fact that it's a sorcery is obviously a huge downside, but if you're looking for, the 5th removal spell in your deck and you were playing Go for the Throat, I wouldn't be surprised if this card is actually what you're looking for. It kind of just has a little bit too much going on that, I'm going to give it a try. Next up is Corey Steel Cutter. So for 1 and a red, you get an equipment with equipped creature gets +1/+1 and trample and haste. And whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you get a 1/1 monk with prowess, and then you attach this equipment to it, and then you can normally equip it for 1 and a red. I think this card's incredible. If you play this and then a cantrip, you get a monk, you get to attack for 2, and if they kill the monk, you get to make another monk at a different turn and attack with that one as well. And the later you make the monk that you're planning on attacking with, the more damage it's going to do because it has prowess. I think this card is really, really good at being a payoff for casting a lot of cantrips, and I expect it to see quite a lot of play. Next up is Iridescent Tiger. So 4 and a red, you get a 3/4, and when this creature ETBs, if you cast it, add Wooburg. I think this would only show up in some channel decks as a way to filter colorless mana into colored mana. But the reason that I've listed it here is that unlike cards like Peregrine Drake, that are also, in theory, mana-positive creatures, this doesn't require you to have any amount of lands in play, which is a real concern when you're going off with certain channel decks. I don't think this card's incredible by any stretch. It's not going to make or break that. But in terms of this kind of effect, this is one of the more potent ones we've seen. Next up is Stormscale Scion. For 4 red, we get a 4/4 flying dragon, with other dragons you control get +1/+1 and storm. If you're playing Elemental Eruption, it's possible you want to play this instead. The main reason I can think of would be Duress, but at the same time there are also ways to interact with non-creature spells. Now, given that your opponent might be able to reanimate this and then just kill you with a flying 4/4, maybe there's a bit of downside to it, but when I'm comparing this versus Eruption's dragons have prowess, which is obviously very good at killing people, but if you have 4 of these, they're all 7/7s, which is definitely enough to just kill people. So I think this might be good enough for that exact reason, as a sideboard Storm Wincon. Tersa Light Shatter. So for 2 and a red, we get a 3/3 with haste. When it ETBs, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. And when it attacks, if you have Threshold, you exile a card at random from your graveyard, and you can play that card this turn. This card is basically Lelia with extra steps. The fact that it hits for the same amount that Lelia does, and it kind of casts cards at a similar rate to Lelia as well. Its requirement is a bit more hefty, but it does give you immediate cards filtration, which Lelia doesn't. I think this card's really good. I don't think it's broken or anything, but I think this will show up anywhere that Lelia would show up. Although that card has been falling off, I do think that this card is better. Heritage Reclamation, not much to say about this. It's a new naturalized that has a third mode, but this third mode is fine. Exile a card from a graveyard and draw a card. Nature's Rhythm is the new Finale of Devastation. For X green, search your library for a creature card with mana value X or less, and then put on the battlefield, and then it has Harmonize for X quadruple green. Having flashback on this effect is real, like it's real upside. However, Finale of Devastation has a few things going for it. For one, you can reanimate a creature with Finale of Devastation. This only searches your library. And for two, the kicker on Finale of Devastation is a real thing that you can use to kill people, and casting this twice, which is a pretty similar amount of mana to kicking a Finale of Devastation. I think this will be fine if you're wanting a third Green Sun Zenith or a fourth Green Sun Zenith. Maybe you play this, maybe you don't. But I think it's fine. Surak Elusive Hunter. For 2 and a green, we have a 4/3 uncountable Trampler, and whenever a creature you control or a creature spell you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, draw a card. This card's really boring. Like, it's a 3 mana 4/3 Trampler that doesn't do anything to the board specifically, but it does have a lot of words on it. The fact that it can't be countered, which means your opponent would only be able to remove it, which then draws you a card, is maybe just enough. Shaper's Sanctuary has seen play in Highlander. It's obviously an enchantment and therefore a lot safer, but it doesn't attack for 4 like this card does, and it doesn't tag counter magic, which Shaper's doesn't interact with counter magic, where this card does. So if you're looking for a 15th or 14th sideboard card in a green mid-range deck, I wouldn't be surprised if giving this a try will give some good results. Next up is Frontline Rush. I have no idea how to evaluate this card. We haven't had Raise the Alarm with this much of an extra kicker before. For the most part, you either have 2 mana Sorcery Speed, make 2 guys, or 2 mana Instant Speed, make 2 guys. Now we have 2 mana Instant Speed, make 2 guys, but if you don't need to do that, you can just blow your opponent up by giving +4/+4 or +6/+6 to a creature. It's in Boros, which, some of the best colors for flooding the board with random creature tokens that you can attack with. I think this card's good. I'm not 100% convinced, but it has a lot of text. Like, being an instant, there's just a lot going on. So I'm gonna give this like a B+ and see what happens. Glacierwood Siege. For 1 and a green, you get an enchantment. You can either make it a Crucible of Worlds, or you can make it a... I don't know what that effect would be whenever you cast an instant or sorcery target player mills for. For the most part, this is Crucible of Worlds number 4 at this point. The reason I've listed it here is that at some point you get to a critical mass of Crucible effects that those decks actually look quite good. And being able to add yet another copy is pretty meaningful, I would say. Next up we have Rakshasa's Bargain. So for black, green, blue, or some amount of hybrid mana, you can look at the top 4, put 2 in your hand, rest in your graveyard, and it's at instant speed. The only reason I'm mentioning it is because of Up the Beanstalk. This triggers Beans even if you cast it for 3. The fact that it's an instant makes it kind of akin to Brain Surge. Like, it's actually pretty close to that. And there's just, like, I don't know, there's a lot of weird use cases for a card like this. The fact that you can put it into a Dimir deck that doesn't pay green, but you maybe have a green land, but you don't actually need that color in order to cast it. The fact that the other two cards you don't take go to your graveyard is like a real upside as well. You're not drawing cards like Brain Surge, so it gets around things like Narset and Orcish Bowmasters. This card is just kind of good, but I don't really know how to evaluate it beyond that. Next is Severance Priest. I actually really like this card. For Abzan, we have a 3/3 with Death Touch, and when it ETBs, your opponent reveals their hand, and then you can exile a card from it. And then when this leaves the battlefield, the exiled card owner creates an XX creature token, where X is the mana value. So it's basically Skyclave Apparition, but it's Thoughtseize instead. A 3/3 with Death Touch is a very real body. The fact that it's 2 clauses does matter. So if you tag a removal spell in your opponent's hand and it's their only removal spell, then your 3/3 might just stick and you might have protected your other creatures. If they only have a bolt and they bolt this, you can take something else and they don't get a creature out of it. So it's kind of like Tide Hollow. It's kind of like Skyclave Apparition. This card's just kind of good. The main downsides are that it's in Abzan and that a 3/3 Death Toucher is a better body for a creature you don't care about, but wanting to leave this in play so that they don't get an XX is pretty meaningful. But otherwise, it's just a really solid card. It's kind of like a much better Sin Collector as well. Next up is Skirmish Rhino. I have no idea how to evaluate this card. Siege Rhino isn't good enough for 7 point, but the difference between 3 and 4 mana is real. The difference between a 4/5 and a 3/4 is real, and 3 life versus 2 life. But if you're looking for something that you can kind of just run out on 3 after playing a Hierarch, like, is this the worst you can do? Probably not. So I figured I'd include it regardless. Twinmore Stormbrood. For 5 and a white, you get a 5/4 flyer with when this creature ETBs, you gain 5 life, and then you can cast it as an omen to get Roast. If you want to play Roast in your sideboard and you have access to white mana, play this instead. It can't be Inquisitioned, it can't be Duressed, it's as simple as that. Windcrag Siege. For 1 red-white, you get an enchantment, and you can choose to cause your creatures that are attacking to trigger multiple times, or you can get free 1/1s with Lifelink and Haste. I don't know. I think this card is fine. I think if you're playing Boris and you want a thing that makes extra guys, you probably have some amount of attacking triggers as well, so maybe you choose that mode every now and then. I'm not super convinced that a 3 mana enchantment that doesn't do much by itself is viable, but if you're looking for a sideboard card and you're in Boris, you might have extra space, and if you're looking for like some random enchantment that's kind of sticky and kind of meaningful, you could do worse than this. We then have Aligned Heart from the Commander set. When you cast your second spell, this gets a rally counter, and then you create a 1/1 monk token with prowess for each rally counter on it. I have no idea how to evaluate this card. It's pretty much Monastery Mentor, but worse, but safer because it's an enchantment. And if you cast multiple spells in your opponent's turn, you get a 1/1 at instant speed that you can attack or block with. I think this card might be a really, really potent sideboard card if you're playing one of those cantrip heavy decks, because a 3 mana enchantment is like quite sticky, and you don't need to put much effort in to start crapping out like 3 monks or 4 monks, and then if you play a single spell, you've got like 8 power, and your opponent could just take, a bunch of damage and maybe die. We have Steward of the Harvest. For 3 and a green for a 3/3, so we get a Hill Giant. When it ETBs, exile up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard, and all your creatures you control have all activated abilities of all land cards exiled with this creature. I don't know what you can do with this card. I'm listing it here because I'm fairly certain you can do something with this card. Whether or not that's good, I will leave up to the brewers, but creatures having the abilities of lands could be very, very scary, and to my knowledge, this isn't an effect we've had before. And then lastly, we have the bait category. These are cards that I expect to see some play, or at the very least be checked out by the 7-point community. However, from my seat, I believe they're not viable and will worsen decks they're played in. Or if you build a deck around one of these cards, it's just going to be a bad time for you. This is very much my opinion, and this is without playing with the cards. So a grain of salt, of course, but maybe giving you a heads up to avoid some stuff. First up, we have Unified Battlefront. This is going to be a pretty controversial one. So for a 4-mana sorcery, you look at the top 7, and you put up to 2 non-creature, non-land permanent cards with mana value 3 or less onto the battlefield, and then put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So it's a collected company, but for non-creature, non-lands, it looks a card deeper, but it's a sorcery. I think there's enough downside, and Coco is bad enough already. Like, there are only so many 3-mana planeswalkers you can actually put in your deck, and that's obviously what you're trying to get here. If you hit a baby Teferi and a baby Narset, that's great. You win the game, congratulations. But there are a lot of situations where you hit like 4 instants and sorceries and 3 lands, and this card's a blank. So I'm fairly confident this card is just bad. We have Tygam, Master Opportunist, for a Grizzly Bear, so 1 and a blue 2/2. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, copy it, then exile the spell you cast with 4 time counters on it. If it doesn't have Suspend, it gains Suspend. So basically, your second spell each turn has Suspend 4 on top as a secondary mode. So if you cast a Brainstorm and then you cast a Tarmogoyf, your original Tarmogoyf will go to your exile in Suspend, and if you then and the copy of Tarmogoyf will come into play. So it's kind of like a value engine, but in order for this to be good, you need to be playing, like, if you play a 0-drop on turn 2 after this, then in 4 turns you get a free 0-drop. On turn 3, in 4 turns, on turn 7, you get a 1-drop. Like, it's just not good enough for a Grizzly Bear, basically. I'm fairly confident this card is bad. We have Rot Curse Rakshasha. For 2 mana, we get a 5/5 with Trample and Decayed, and X black, exile this card from your yard, put a Decayed counter on each of up to X target creatures, activate only as a sorcery. I have no idea if this card is any good. I think it's not. A 2 mana 5/5 Trample is a Lava Axe, and that's fine, and then you can flash it back as a Falter effect, so that your opponent can't block. If you do it for value and the Falter effect isn't killing them, when they crack back, their creatures will die. And the flashback isn't a spell, it's an activated ability, so it's a lot harder to interact with. But the front side is a 2 mana 5/5 that can't block, that just does damage and dies. I'm pretty sure it's bad. We have the Sig Ceremony. For triple black, we have creature spells you cast cost 2 less, and whenever a creature you control enters, if you cast it, destroy it, and then make a 2/2 zombie druid creature token. I have literally no idea whether or not this card is good. I think people will probably try and brew something janky with it. We've had Heartless Summoning before, but the discounted cards you got to keep, and now you're just kind of getting 2/2s. There are obviously cards you can play where when it ETBs, if you cast it, destroy it, but there's a trigger on the stack that's going to bounce it to your hand, for example. So like Ancestral Statue would be one thing I could think of, but I'm fairly confident Like, even if it was 2 and a black, I don't think this card would be playable, but in this instance, it's actually triple black. So don't play this. We have Sinkhole Surveyor. I actually saw this get talked about in the server. So for 1 and a black, you get a 1/3 flyer, and when this attacks, you lose a life, and this endures 1. So when it attacks, you can make it bigger, or you can get a 1/1. Critically, the 1/1 doesn't have flying, and you lose a life every turn, and it has to attack because a 2-mana 1/3 flyer is not good enough. If you play a Ledger Shredder and then it dies and you didn't get any triggers, it's not good enough, and this card is very reminiscent of that, except the payoff is worse. So I'm pretty sure this card is just not playable, and you should be spending your 2 mana on something productive. Dracogenesis. This card's just awful. Please don't play it. Please don't show and tell it into play. Please don't Academy Rector for it. Just put Omniscience into play. Flamehold Grappler. I'm sure there's something silly you can do with this card, but I imagine that's much better in 4 copy constructed formats. I don't think there's any spell in our format that would be powerful enough that you would want to add 3 mana as a fork to it. Like, it is versatile, but it's also a 3 mana 3/3. It does have First Strike, which is nice, but I'm pretty sure this card is asking a little bit too much of you, despite it looking like it doesn't ask anything of you. We have Mardu Siegebreaker. So for 1 and a Mardu, you get a 4/4 Death Touch with haste. When it ETBs, exile another creature you control, and when this attacks, you get a token of that creature. I'm almost certain this card is unplayable, and I'm also almost certain that people will try to play it. In order for you to get value out of this card, you have to exile one of your other cards that you've already spent mana for, and you don't get to attack with it that turn. And then if this dies, you get that creature back, and that's fine. You get another trigger. If you do get to attack, you get another trigger of that creature that you ate, because presumably you're using some kind of enters the battlefield trigger. But there are going to be plenty of instances where you spend 4 mana on this in your pre-combat main phase, you target one of your creatures, they kill this in response, that creature doesn't get to flicker, and you spent 4 mana for a 4/4 that dies to Fatal Push, Swords to Plowshares, Unholy Heat. It's just a lot. And the payoff isn't even that good. So I'm pretty confident this card is not playable. We have Monastery Messenger for Jeskai with the hybrid cost. We have a Flying Vigilance 2/3, and when it ETBs, you can put a non-creature, non-land card from your graveyard on top of your library. We've seen effects like this before where it's not an Archaeomancer, so it gets to be cheaper. Being in white means you can put something like a Terminus on top. But realistically, you know, you don't want Mystic Sanctuary on a body because those decks aren't looking for a 3 mana 2/3 flyer. It's just not good enough. We then have Narset Jeskai Waymaster. For Jeskai, you get a 3/4, so we get a Spider Tank's worth of stats. Beginning of your end step, you can discard your hand. If you do, draw cards equal to the number of spells you've cast this turn. Someone will try and break this, and they'll probably be convinced that they have broken it. I am 99% sure this card is completely unplayable. We have Songcrafter Mage. This one's an interesting one. People really are thinking about this card. So for Teamer, you get a 3/2 flash. ETB, target instant or sorcery in your graveyard gains Harmonize. Its Harmonize is equal to its mana cost. So it's basically Snapcaster Mage. However, the Harmonize means that you can reduce the cost of some of your spells by tapping this, which is not 0. In exchange, you have a card that is significantly harder to cast. The difference between 2 and 3 mana is very large, and the difference between a 3/2 and a 2/1 is not that large. I'm I'm really certain this card is just not good enough. Temur is so hard to cast. Harmonize is very negligible because the vast majority of spells you will be casting from your graveyard will be 1-drop and 2-drop spells. And if you're using it to target a 2-drop spell, if that 2-drop doesn't have colorless pips, it still costs the full amount of mana. So if you're using it for counterspell or mana drain, it does not help you. I'm going to put this in the bait category. Mox Jasper. Don't play it. There aren't enough dragons. Moxen are not good enough when they're not real Moxen, with the exception of Opal, but that card is basically a Moxen. This card is not. Mox Amber is so much better and so much easier to turn on, but just because we know that Mox Amber is good, does not mean that the other non-Moxen are worth trying out, because this card isn't. We have Great Arashan City, or Arashan City. This is a cycle of lands, but I'm only going to mention 2 of them. This land need to be tapped unless you control a forest or a plains, otherwise it's a swamp. And then for 1 and a black, tap, exile a creature card from your graveyard, make a 1/1. This is very reminiscent of Moorland Haunt, however there are a bunch of differences. Moorland Haunt never came into play tapped, and it would tap for colorless, sure, but it never came into play tapped, and it made flyers. It made them at a rate that was different to this rate, but it made flyers, and that is a very, very big deal. This land is also black, which is the color where you want your creatures to stay in your graveyard so you can use them for something else. Eating them from your graveyard for this is not good enough. Then we have Misrise Village. This is the Temur one of this cycle. Blue, tap, the next spell you cast this turn can't be countered. Yes, you can use this to force through a spell, like Show and Tell, or Channel, or Reanimate, for example, or Sneak Attack, or Through the Breach, Oath of Druids. But it's an island. It isn't even always an island. It's probably going to come into play tapped a lot. It's 2 mana in order to make a spell uncounterable, which basically adds 2 turns to that. And that puts a lot of pressure on you to just, like, not lose the game. This one could be good. It might be close enough if you're already playing Temur. But if you're playing Temur, you probably aren't playing spells you care about, whether or not they get countered, because you have your own interaction and a lot of your threats are replaceable. If this was in something like Esper, I could see it, or like Abzan or Naya, but I'm not seeing it with this. We have Coda Sibsig Champion. For Sultai, we get a 3/3. You can cast a creature from your graveyard once a turn by exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard and then paying its cost. So basically, every creature in your graveyard has escape for 3. And then whenever 1 or more creatures you control enter, if one of them entered from the graveyard or was cast from your graveyard, put 2 counters on it. I think it's too medium. It probably has some amount of potential, but like it's kind of just a pile of words on a 3/3/3. We then have the new Sidisi. So Teval, the Balanced Scale. For 1 and a Sultai, you get a 4/4 flyer. When it attacks, mill 3, and then you can reanimate a land. And whenever 1 or more cards leaves your graveyard, create a 2/2. I think this card might be okay. A 4/4/4 flyer that needs to attack isn't the worst thing, because it probably lets you block on that turn. It's kind of just a slow, dirtly value-based engine, which isn't really what our format looks like. So if you attack with this, mill some cards, bring a land back, you can make a 2/2 to block, but your 4/4 is tapped. I'm not 100% sure this is good enough. I feel like you can be spending your mana on better cards. We have Teval's Judgment. 3 mana enchantment. Whenever a card leaves your graveyard, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Draw a card, treasure token, 2/2. Pretty sure it's just not good enough. 3 mana enchantment is asking a lot. It's kind of like Monument to Endurance, and I'm still confident that card sucks, and this card is even harder to turn on. If you want to do this effect, just play Ketramos. Although in this instance, this is a lot stickier than Ketramos, so maybe it might also show up in the same decks, but I'm really not seeing it. Floral Evoker, for 3 mana you have a 2/3, landfall, it gets a counter, and kind of a survival ability. Green, discard a creature, reanimate a land. I think this card might be okay, but I think it's too expensive and too slow. And discarding a creature card to reanimate a land isn't really what you want to be doing, because your lands decks probably shouldn't be playing that many creatures. And it gets bigger, but like really slowly, so I've put it in bait. But that's it for Tarkir Dragonstorm. There are obviously plenty of other cards in the set that I didn't speak about. And if I didn't speak about them, that doesn't necessarily mean they aren't completely viable in Highlander. I just wanted to highlight the cards that I think had the most reason to see play in our format. But if you disagree, or if you have any thoughts about any cards, leave your comments below. Let me know what you're going to be trying out in Tarkir Dragonstorm. This video and all of my videos was proudly brought to you by my March patrons and donors. If you'd like to see your name up here on screen, feel free to check out the link down below to join the Patreon. But otherwise, leave a comment, leave a like, and I'll catch you all next time.